The island was little more than a speck of volcanic ash in the endless Pacific, 8 square miles of rock, sulfur, and sand. Yet in the winter of 1945, this speck became one of the most fiercely contested pieces of land in human history. Its name was Iwo Jima. To the Americans, it was a stepping stone to Japan. To the Japanese, it was sacred ground, part of their homeland, the last shield before the enemy reached Tokyo. The air above the island was heavy with smoke and the faint stench of sulfur that seeped from its volcanic heart. Black ash coated everything, the bunkers, the guns, the men themselves. The Japanese soldiers called it the Island of Death. Beneath its surface, unseen by the sky, thousands of them worked silently in darkness, digging deeper each day. Their hands were raw and blistered. Their faces were streaked with sweat and soot. They carved tunnels into the heart of the mountain, carving their graves with every swing of a pickaxe. At the center of it all stood Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. Calm, deliberate, and soft-spoken, he was not like most Japanese commanders of the time. He had once studied in the United States, had met Americans, laughed with them, even admired them. He had written letters home, describing the kindness of the American people. But now those same people were coming to destroy him. Kuribayashi was a realist. He understood Japan's position far better than most of his superiors. He knew that Japan could no longer win the war. The empire's fleet lay shattered, its air force broken, its cities burning from nightly air raids. But he also knew that surrender was not an option. His duty was to defend Iwo Jima at all costs, to delay the Americans, to inflict such losses that they would think twice before invading the Japanese mainland. He looked over the maps spread before him in his underground command post. Every ridge, every crater, every slope of the island was marked with precise detail. He had turned Iwo Jima into a fortress unlike anything the world had ever seen. No man would survive above ground. The battle would be fought below it, in the dark. Kuribayashi's orders were simple and absolute. No banzai charges, no senseless suicides. His men would not die screaming as they rushed into machine gun fire. They would die killing the enemy one by one, from hidden positions. Every bullet would count. Every life would be traded for 10 of the enemy's. Many officers were shocked by his commands. To abandon the banzai charge was to abandon a sacred tradition of Japanese warfare. Some thought him too cautious, even cowardly. But Kuribayashi stood firm. He had seen the futility of such charges in previous battles. He had studied the American way of war, their firepower, their mobility, their logistics. He knew the Marines would come with overwhelming strength. If his men fought as they always had, they would be wiped out in hours. So he built something new, something terrible, an underground city of death. Tunnels stretched for 11 miles beneath the island, connecting bunkers, artillery positions, and command posts. Hidden beneath Mount Suribachi, the volcanic peak that loomed over the beaches, Kuribayashi established a labyrinth of defenses. There were storage rooms for ammunition, chambers for wounded soldiers, and narrow crawl spaces that allowed men to move unseen from one end of the island to the other. Some tunnels were so deep that not even the heaviest naval shells could penetrate them. Above ground, every hill concealed a gun. Every rock was a trap. The Americans would find nothing but smoke and sand, yet death would come from nowhere. For months, his men toiled in silence. Supplies were scarce. Food came only sporadically. Water was rationed drop by drop. But morale, though grim, remained steady. Kuribayashi was not a distant commander. He visited the tunnel sites daily, speaking quietly with his men, listening to their worries, offering encouragement. He wrote letters to his wife and children in Japan, telling them of his love and his pride. "I will fight with all my heart," he wrote in one of his final letters. "If I die, I hope it will be a death worthy of Japan." By February 1945, the island was ready. On the morning of February 16th, the horizon trembled with thunder. The Americans had come. Hundreds of warships appeared like ghosts out of the mist, their gray hulls gleaming in the dull light. Then the bombardment began. The sky turned to fire. Battleships unleashed shells the size of small cars. The ground shook so violently that the tunnels themselves seemed to groan. For 3 straight days, the island was pounded without mercy. The beaches boiled under the barrage. Trees vanished. Hills were flattened. The sea turned black with ash and debris. The Americans believed nothing could survive that kind of bombardment. To them, Iwo Jima was already dead. But beneath the surface, Kuribayashi's army waited in silence. They listened to the shells screaming overhead, the explosions rumbling through the rock. Some prayed. Others cleaned their rifles and checked their ammunition. No one spoke loudly. The general's orders were clear. Not a single shot was to be fired until the Americans had filled the beaches. On February 19th, the shelling finally stopped. The sudden silence was almost unbearable. Then, as the sun climbed into the smoky sky, the sea filled with landing craft. The first waves of U.S. Marines began their approach. The men could see the island ahead, a desolate stretch of black sand and smoke, rising up to the dark cone of Mount Suribachi. As the landing craft neared shore, the Marines expected resistance. But none came. The Japanese guns were silent. The only sound was the crash of the surf and the rumble of engines. They landed unopposed and began moving inland, dragging equipment, setting up radios, regrouping under the burning sun. Some joked that the bombardment must have killed every enemy on the island. Others knew better. They felt it, the eerie tension, the sense that eyes were watching from everywhere. Still, the beach grew crowded as more and more troops arrived. Tanks rolled ashore, bulldozers cleared the sand, and lines of men advanced cautiously up the slopes. Then, at precisely 10 a.m., Kuribayashi gave the signal. From every ridge and bunker, from every hidden gun and tunnel mouth, the island erupted. The silence shattered into chaos. Machine guns opened fire, tearing into the densely packed Marines. Mortars rained down from unseen positions. Bullets ricocheted off helmets, sand sprayed into the air, men fell screaming into the surf. The first hour of the battle became a slaughter. Entire platoons vanished in minutes. Tanks burst into flames as Japanese artillery zeroed in from camouflaged positions. The black beaches turned red with blood. The soft volcanic sand offered no cover, no footing. Men tried to dig in, but their shovels only sank deeper into ash. Kuribayashi watched through a periscope from his command post. His plan had worked perfectly. He had waited until the beaches were full before opening fire. Every shot, every shell was calculated to cause maximum destruction. The Americans were trapped between the sea and the cliffs. Reports began coming in from across the island. The enemy was advancing, but slowly, painfully. Japanese gunners shifted positions through the tunnels, firing, then disappearing before the Americans could locate them. The defenders were invisible, yet everywhere. By nightfall, the beaches were a graveyard of wrecked vehicles and bodies. Over 2,000 Marines were dead or wounded, the bloodiest opening day in Marine Corps history. Still, more Americans kept coming. Kuribayashi knew he could not stop them forever, but that had never been his goal. His mission was to make them bleed, to turn Iwo Jima into a wound so deep that it would scar the enemy's soul. As darkness fell, the island burned. The sea glowed orange from fires that raged along the shore. The cries of the wounded echoed across the sand. Kuribayashi sat in silence, writing another letter by the light of a single lantern. He told his wife not to grieve. He told his children to study hard, to grow strong, to love peace when peace returned. Then he folded the letter carefully and placed it in his map case. Outside, the rumble of artillery grew closer. The battle for Iwo Jima had begun, and it would not end until the island itself was consumed by death. Night never truly fell on Iwo Jima. Even when the sun sank below the Pacific horizon, the island glowed with the fire of war. Shells burst in the dark, tracer rounds cut streaks of red across the sky, and the black sands trembled beneath the endless barrage. For the men fighting there, time lost all meaning. There was no day or night anymore, only survival, moment to moment, heartbeat to heartbeat. The Americans dug deeper into the beaches they had claimed, building foxholes, dragging up supplies, tending to the wounded who cried for water. Morphine or mothers thousands of miles away. The dead lay everywhere, Marines half buried in the ash, their helmets still glinting in the firelight. The smell of sulfur mixed with smoke and blood. For those who lived, it became impossible to eat or sleep without tasting death in the air. Deep beneath the surface, in tunnels cut through volcanic rock, the Japanese waited. They were hungry, exhausted, and filthy, but they still held firm. General Kuribayashi's orders remained absolute. No banzai attacks, no waste of life. Every soldier would fight from concealment, strike hard, then vanish underground before the Americans could retaliate. The labyrinth he had built was working exactly as intended. Each tunnel was alive with whispers and footsteps. The walls dripped moisture. Lamps burned low, their light flickering over faces gaunt from sleeplessness. Some men wrote letters they knew would never be sent. Others sat in silence, clutching their rifles like prayer beads. A few sang softly, old songs from home, songs of mountains, cherry blossoms, and families waiting far away. Among these soldiers was a man whose story stood apart from the rest, Baron Takeshi Nishi. To the world before the war, Nishi had been a symbol of grace and refinement. He had been an Olympic champion, winning gold in horseback riding at the 1932 Los Angeles Games. Photographs from that time showed him smiling, dressed in immaculate uniform, shaking hands with American athletes. He had loved his horses, his country, and the honor of competition. But now, years later, he sat in a bunker filled with the roar of artillery, commanding a handful of tanks buried up to their turrets in volcanic rock. His beloved horses were long dead. The world of polite applause and medals was gone. Nishi still carried himself with the dignity of a nobleman. His men adored him for his calmness and courage. He spoke to them softly, calling them by name, never shouting. When shells landed nearby, he would simply smile and say, "We are still alive, so we still fight." The Baron had turned his tanks into fixed gun positions, perfectly camouflaged, waiting for the Americans to advance. When they did, his guns would open fire with deadly precision, then disappear beneath camouflage nets again. For the Americans, the battle became a nightmare they could not wake from. They were used to victory coming fast, Guadalcanal, Saipan, Tarawa, but Iwo Jima was different. Every time they thought the enemy was defeated, gunfire would erupt from somewhere new. Hills they thought secured suddenly came alive again. Bunkers they cleared exploded behind them. The enemy seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. Marines described it as fighting ghosts in hell. The tunnels made every advance painfully slow. Flamethrowers and grenades became the only way to fight. The Marines would locate a bunker, spray it with napalm, then toss in grenades until all movement stopped. But as soon as they moved on, the Japanese emerged from other tunnel exits, reopening fire. The same ground changed hands again and again, paid for with blood each time. Inside the tunnels, Kuribayashi continued to move among his men. He slept only a few hours each night, ate the same meager rations as his soldiers, and wrote often in his diary. He was proud of his men but heartbroken by their suffering. He knew the outcome was inevitable. Japan's high command had sent him to hold the island, but they had given him no hope of rescue. The Navy was gone. The skies belonged to the enemy. Every shell, every bullet, every drop of water was irreplaceable. Still, he fought on, not for victory, but for honor, for the belief that their sacrifice might somehow save Japan a greater destruction. Each man must kill 10 Americans, he told his officers. That is the only way we can hope to delay them. Above ground, Mount Suribachi loomed over the island like a black fang. It was the southern anchor of the Japanese defense, and Kuribayashi knew it could not be held forever. The Americans were closing in from the beaches, their artillery creeping higher with each passing day. Still, the defenders of Suribachi fought to the last. They turned every cave and crevice into a death trap. Machine gunners fired until their barrels melted. Mortar teams stayed at their posts even after their ammunition was gone, choosing to die rather than surrender. After 5 days of relentless assault, the Marines finally reached the summit. Exhausted, bloodied, and deafened by constant bombardment, they raised a small American flag over the mountain. From below, cheers erupted among their comrades. The sight of that flag waving against the smoke-filled sky gave them hope that the nightmare was nearly over. But it wasn't. The Japanese still controlled most of the island, and Kuribayashi's main defensive line remained intact. When the Americans replaced the small flag with a larger one for the cameras, the men below cheered again, but their commanders knew the truth. The battle had only reached its midpoint. In the days that followed, the fighting grew even more savage. The Americans advanced yard by yard, clearing tunnels, filling craters, dragging flamethrowers through the ash. The Japanese counterattacked from underground, striking suddenly and vanishing back into the dark. Each skirmish was fought at point-blank range. Sometimes men fired their rifles down tunnel mouths so close that the muzzle flash burned their hands. The Marines grew hard and quiet. They learned that no wounded Japanese could be approached without caution. Many clutched grenades to their chests, waiting for an enemy to lean close. The black sand reeked of death and fuel. Food came from ration tins that tasted of sulfur. Water was hot and full of grit. Sleep came in stolen minutes, interrupted by screams or explosions. Still, amid the madness, moments of strange humanity appeared. On one night, a group of American soldiers captured a wounded Japanese officer. In his pocket, they found a photograph of his wife and 2 children. The image was worn from being handled too often, the corners frayed. One Marine stared at it for a long time before setting it gently beside the man's body. He was fighting for his family, he murmured. Same as us. Inside his bunker, Baron Nishi wrote his final letter. He thanked his superiors for the honor of serving, and he apologized for not being able to deliver victory. He mentioned the horses he once rode in California, wondering if any of them still lived. His handwriting was elegant, his words calm. The next day his position was overrun. Some said he died fighting. Others claimed he took his own life rather than be captured. His body was never recovered. Kuribayashi received the news with a heavy heart. He respected Nishi deeply, a nobleman, a warrior, a friend, but he had no time to mourn. The battle was closing in around him. Supplies were nearly gone. His men were starving, some reduced to chewing roots and bark. Still, they fought with the same discipline, the same unbreakable resolve. By the 3rd week, the Americans had pushed past Suribachi and into the heart of the island. The landscape was unrecognizable, a wasteland of craters, smoke, and twisted metal. Yet still from beneath the ground the Japanese fired back. The tunnels had become tombs now, filled with the dead and the dying. The wounded begged for water that no longer existed. Officers used their final bullets on themselves rather than surrender. Kuribayashi walked through the tunnels with a small lamp, his face calm, his uniform coated in dust. Every few feet he stopped to speak with soldiers who could barely stand. "You have fought bravely," he told them. "You have done enough." But none of them stopped fighting. Above him, the Marines advanced slowly, clearing one bunker at a time. The air was so thick with smoke that men sometimes lost sight of each other a few feet away. The roar of flamethrowers and the thunder of explosives never ceased. Kuribayashi's defense, though doomed, had achieved its purpose. The Americans were bleeding, thousands dead, tens of thousands wounded. Each yard of ground cost dearly. Every hill, every trench was a price paid in blood. As night fell on another day of slaughter, Kuribayashi sat at his desk and wrote again to his wife. His words were steady, almost peaceful. He told her that the island was nearly lost, that he would soon die among his men. He asked her to care for their children, to raise them to be strong, to live for peace. "I will fight until the end," he wrote. "But I long for the quiet of our garden, the sound of your voice, the laughter of our son. When you think of me, do not cry. I will be among the stars watching over you." He folded the letter and placed it beside his sword. Outside, the walls shook with another barrage. The island, once silent and defiant, was beginning to crumble under the weight of war. Yet even as the ground burned above them, Kuribayashi and his men remained below, unseen, unbroken, and unyielding. The sun rose weakly over the shattered island, casting its pale light across a landscape that no longer resembled Earth. The black sand had been churned into a graveyard of twisted metal, scorched bunkers, and the silent remains of men who had fought until nothing was left to give. The once solid ridges were cratered beyond recognition, and the smell of death hung thick in the air, clinging to every breath. Iwo Jima, once an unremarkable island of volcanic ash, had become a monument to human endurance and human ruin. For General Kuribayashi, the end was near. He could feel it in the tremors that ran through the tunnels, in the distant rumble of explosions that drew closer each hour. His defenses had held longer than anyone in Tokyo had dared to hope. 30 days of continuous combat, 30 days of defiance against a force that dwarfed his own in every measure. He had bought Japan time, Perhaps only days, perhaps weeks, but time all the same. It had cost him everything. He moved slowly through the tunnels, his steps measured and silent. The walls were blackened from smoke, the air thick with the stench of blood and decay. Many passages had collapsed, trapping the wounded within. Their muffled cries could still be heard, echoing faintly in the darkness. Kuribayashi paused each time he passed one of those blocked corridors, bowing his head briefly in silent prayer. He wanted to help them, but he could not. The war had reduced even compassion to luxury. His officers followed him, thinner now, their uniforms torn, their eyes sunken. Once the tunnels had been alive with movement and whispers, but now they felt like tombs. Every few hundred feet, a candle flickered beside the body of a fallen soldier. Each man had died as ordered, fighting until he could not fight any more. Kuribayashi touched the hilt of his sword, the same one he had carried since his youth, and wondered if his son would ever know where he had fallen. Above ground, the Marines continued their grim advance. They moved with wary precision, clearing bunkers one by one, flamethrowers leading the way. Every step was a battle. Every crater held the possibility of sudden death. They no longer thought of victory or glory, only survival. Some Marines, hardened by weeks of slaughter, refused to take prisoners. Others, weary and haunted, treated each captured Japanese soldier with unexpected mercy. War had changed them all. By the end of the 5th week, the Americans controlled nearly all of the island. Only a few pockets of resistance remained, small groups of Japanese soldiers hidden deep within the northern tunnels, cut off, starving, but unwilling to surrender. Kuribayashi was among them. His command post had moved several times, retreating deeper underground as the front closed in. The few men left to him were wounded, many without ammunition, yet still they waited for his orders. He gathered his officers one final time in a low, smoke-stained chamber lit by a single oil lamp. The air was heavy and silent. Dust drifted from the ceiling as distant explosions shook the ground above. Kuribayashi looked around the circle of faces, men who had followed him without question, who had given everything for a cause that could no longer be won. He spoke quietly, his voice calm and steady. "We have fought with honor," he said. "You have obeyed every order, endured every hardship. Our mission was to defend this island to the last man. You have done so. Japan will remember your courage, but now the time has come. We will not die in these tunnels like trapped rats. We will go above ground. We will attack. We will die as soldiers." There was no hesitation, no protest. Each man bowed his head in silent acceptance. They knew what it meant. That night, as the Americans slept fitfully in their trenches, Kuribayashi led his remaining troops out of the tunnels for one last assault. It was March 25, 1945. The sky was moonless, the wind carrying the faint scent of the sea. The Japanese moved like shadows across the ruined landscape, weapons clutched in trembling hands, bayonets fixed. Some carried swords, others only grenades. They crept close to the American lines before the first shout of alarm split the night. Then came chaos. Gunfire erupted in all directions. Flares burst into the air, painting the island in a ghostly white light. The Japanese charged through the smoke, screaming, firing, stabbing, throwing grenades into foxholes. The Americans, startled but experienced, fought back with overwhelming firepower. Machine guns tore through the charging figures, artillery boomed, and flamethrowers sent pillars of fire roaring into the darkness. Still, the Japanese pressed forward, fighting with a desperation beyond reason. Kuribayashi was among them, sword drawn, his voice ringing out above the din. He fought like a man already dead, his movements precise and fluid, his resolve unshaken. For a few fleeting minutes, his soldiers broke through the American lines, sowing confusion and death. But the outcome was never in doubt. Within an hour, the last organized Japanese attack on Iwo Jima had been crushed. When dawn came, the battlefield was littered with bodies, Japanese and American alike. Smoke drifted lazily over the black sand. In a shallow crater near the northern tip of the island, an American patrol found several dead officers. Among them was a body dressed in a general's uniform, his face unrecognizable, his sword lying beside him. Some believed it was Kuribayashi, others insisted he had died elsewhere, his body buried by his men. No one could say for certain. The battle was officially declared over on March 26, 1945, after 36 days of unrelenting combat. Of the 21,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 200 were captured alive. The rest lay beneath the island's shattered surface, entombed in the tunnels they had built. The Americans counted over 26,000 casualties, with nearly 7,000 dead, the highest toll in Marine Corps history. The island that had cost so much was nothing but rock and ruin, yet its value would soon become clear. Iwo Jima's airfields, once defended with such fury, became a lifeline for American bombers returning from raids over Japan. In the months that followed, more than 2,000 B-29s made emergency landings there, saving the lives of over 24,000 airmen. The men who had died on its black sands had not fallen for nothing. In Japan, news of Iwo Jima's fall spread slowly, wrapped in silence and shame. The government spoke of heroism, of duty fulfilled, but the truth was too heavy to celebrate. Families received telegrams that began with the same cold phrase, "Your son has died gloriously in battle." Kuribayashi's family was among them. His wife Yoshi read the letter in silence. She had known it would come. She placed it on the family altar beside her husband's photograph and prayed. When his letters were later published, Japan saw the man behind the myth. They read his words, his love for his children, his sorrow at sending men to die, his quiet respect for the Americans he once knew. He had not fought out of hatred, but out of duty, out of loyalty to the soldiers who depended on him. Even his enemies came to admire him. American officers who studied his defense called it brilliant, disciplined, and tragically human. Years passed. The war ended. The world changed. But Iwo Jima remained. The island was scarred and silent, its tunnels sealed, its beaches still black with ash. In time, survivors from both sides returned. Old men now, they walked together on the same sands where they had once tried to kill each other. Some brought flowers. Others brought tears they had held back for half a lifetime. An American veteran once stood beside a Japanese counterpart at the base of Mount Suribachi. They looked up at the peak where the flag had been raised so long ago. "I lost friends here," the Marine said quietly. "So did I," replied the Japanese man. They bowed to each other, not as enemies, but as men who had both survived something that defied understanding. The island became sacred ground, a place of mourning, of memory, of lessons that came too late. For the Americans, it symbolized sacrifice and victory. For the Japanese, honor and loss. For the world, it stood as a warning of the terrible cost of pride and war. Today, when the wind blows across Iwo Jima, it carries whispers through the old tunnels, faint echoes of voices that once swore never to surrender. The sea still crashes against the black shores, washing over the bones buried beneath the sand. The flag still waves atop Suribachi, not as a symbol of conquest, but of endurance, courage, and the shared pain of those who fought there, and somewhere, perhaps beneath the earth or among the stars. The spirit of Tadamichi Kuribayashi still walks the tunnels he built, his duty done, his honor unbroken, his name forever bound to the island he turned into a fortress and into a grave.